also, let me just show you a little bit. This is Monty's book for any of you. Not only is Monty a wonderful educator, and again, his Twitter feed is how I discovered him. It's honest, it's vulnerable, it's touching, it's real. And I know a lot of people aren't feeling the Twitter love these days, but man, if you just want to get a peek into Monty's classroom, you've got to follow him on his Twitter feed and get his new book. Which, how long has this book been out, Monty?
5 months. It just came out the first of the year, so we're about 5.5 months right now, and I'm just excited to have it out in the world to share with everyone.
All right. Okay, so let's get to it. First question. Here we go. Because your whole book is about doing better, just as teaching and learning, but we're focusing on grading tonight. So, First question I want to know. Let's talk about your frustration with grading. And basically, like, what's your origin story? How did you get started on this? I don't know. How'd you get started on this whole mission to change grading?
I suspect I started where everyone else started, Steph. And that's, at some point along our career, whether it was in the second year, the third year, maybe the 15th or 20th year, we started to realize that something wasn't quite right with grading, that there were just too many ways and too many instances where it was getting in the way of learning. And, as Antonio shared in my bio, in the fall of 2016, I started Project 180, which actually had begun the spring before, when I was doing an independent learning project with my kiddos, and all they cared about was how they were going to get the grade at the end. So here I had taken all of the things away, thought that I had given them voice, thought that I had given them choice. And the only thing they were worried about in the end was the grading. And so at that point, I had started blogging. And, one of the things that I found myself blogging about most was grading, because in my experience, grading was getting in the way of learning. And so for me, it began a journey of, how do I get to the place where grading is no longer getting in the way of learning, where grading is no longer getting in the way of teaching. And in the fall of 2016,
go ahead. I'm sorry. I wanted to interrupt for a minute. When you say grading is getting in the way of learning, explain that a little more. I'm sure not enough people in our audience, especially at the end of the year, have a lot of grade grubbers, but yeah, talk a little bit more about how it's getting in the way of learning.
Yeah, I think beyond the grade grubbing, I think it gets in the way of learning when, kids start just wanting to complete the transaction with us. I don't think we ever intended for education just to be transactional, and by the time the kids were getting to me in high school, they had been so conditioned into completing transactions with teachers. That's all that they wanted to do. And, I generally found two camps of kids, like, what's the most I have to do to get an A, and what's the least I have to do to pass. And when we're talking about that, we're really not talking about the value and the benefit of learning. We're talking about playing the game of grading, which I talk about pretty extensively in the book. And so for me, when we're having those types of conversations, it gets in the way of not only learning, but recently, I've kind of come, and I even tweeted out something today, like, I ditched grading, to get to learning, but really I did it to get to teaching too, because, when the kids aren't worried about what grade am I going to get on this, it changes the entire conversation about the work that we're doing in the classroom. And that is where I wanted to get with my kiddos. I was done with the game of grades. I was done completing transactions with them. I wanted them to learn for the sake of learning, to grow themselves. And so, in that fall of 2016, I decided to take a pretty bold step, and I gave every kid for the entire year an A. I mean, I literally, crafted wooden A's that summer to hand to my kids before they even met me. As they were walking through the door, I was handing them a wooden A that I had made, and without saying anything. And so when they sat down and when the bell rang and class began, I said, "Welcome to my language arts class. You all have an A for the year."
Oh my. Okay, so wait. So
no matter what.
So they all said, so that like took it right off the table, right? No pressure, no panic. And then what kind of behavior did you get from the kids?
Well, a lot of it was disbelief. Like, who's this
Yeah.
guy? Like, really? And so then the questions began. The questions we can anticipate. Like going back to like, well, what if I don't do this, and what if I do this? And it's just like, guys, no matter what happens this year, you are getting an A out of my class. And so with that in mind, what are we going to do for the next 180 days together? You know, um, you have an opportunity. I can provide support for that opportunity. Let's see what we can do. And as I outlined in the book in year one, the year of the A is what I called that chapter. It was a transformational year for me in so many ways, Steph. And it really did give me an opportunity to take grading completely off the table, leaving only learning on the table to see what I could learn, and to see what the kids could learn. I think initially I thought, I was like, hey, I'm going to do this big project, for the year, and then I'm going to come out of it with answers for everyone. And as I share in the book, this is not a book of answers. This is a book of betters. All that I discovered by trying to learn more was not arriving at the place, but only arriving at a place to springboard me into the next place, into the next place, into the next place. And so that's really what Project 180 became about. Ultimately, and as Antonio shared, my mantra became do, reflect, do better, because it's really just about chasing that next better around the bend. And I was more invigorated and liberated, if you will, at year 20 than I had been, for all the years before. And it's been a liberating experience, and I've learned so much, and I've got a long ways to go.
Yeah. Well, firstly, yes, Project 180, you have to go. Everything you need to know about how to make this happen in your own classroom is on Monty's website. Also on his Twitter feed, like this. How do you, so if you notice, someone in the comments, was it Rebecca, said her kids love she's sharing your messages with her students.
Oh.
Rebecca said that in the chat, with her sixth graders. How do you come up so first of all, again, I imagine you created this really collaborative classroom, a partnership, not I'm in front of the room and I've got the information and I'm going to give it to you guys, and you'll just have to sit there and take it from me, but more of a collaboration too. And so then again, just real quickly, how do you come up with your messages every day?
Yeah, funny thing that I sit down every day quietly at my desk after I've kind of done my learning targets for the day and other things for the day. And then I just sit down quietly and I just come up with them, and oftentimes stuff, they're things that we've been working on, things that I want to remind the kids of, things I want to bring to the kids' attention. But really, this is it, and people ask, why do you call them my room messages? Why aren't they our room messages? And I have an answer for that. I think all of us as teachers are creators of worlds. What I mean by that is when kids walk into our classroom, they enter a world, and we have a huge impact on how that world feels to them. And so when I write them my room messages, they are my personal messages to them to help create and reinforce the ways that I want them to feel in my classroom, that it is a mantle of responsibility that I am taking. And so these are my daily messages to them, and they have very little to do with content ever. They have to do with the human connection and interaction that we are going to go through. Just recently, and we were talking about GPT and AI and stuff before. It's like, and just recently on one of my messages, I said, hey, yep, you can probably get away with cheating in here. And if I catch you, I'm probably not going to punish you. And where does that leave us? And I told my kids, I think this is where it leaves us, is like, you can either cheat or you can grow. It's your learning, and that's the thing that really has been huge for me in terms of discovering myself and our work through Project 180, is that it's really about having kids take greater ownership and responsibility. And I'm not saying like we're pawning it off on them, we're passing the buck, but getting them to think about taking the ownership and responsibility of learning. But importantly, for us to make sure that we're creating and sustaining and nurturing that space for that to happen. I can't just say, hey, you own your learning,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like the kids have to feel that, and they have to be able to speak to that. And so that's part of my work, and it begins, I think, every day with my room message. I never intended to write as many as I have. I've had people ask me, like, do you have a collection of them? Yes, on my phone because I take a picture of them every day. But I don't really draw these from anywhere, and they're all original. I've never repeated one. And so that's just the stage that I want to set each day when my kids come into my room.
And it is your generosity to give that. It's on your Twitter feed. Anybody can use them and start their own classroom collaborative partnership, which is what it does. Okay. So the next thing we want to talk about, and Tony, we really want to talk about what this looks like. Okay. You can talk about it philosophically, but let's get to the nitty gritty of it.
Okay.
Yeah, so Monty, in Disruptor's Guide to Traditional Norms, you outline the simple and subversive steps to break away from the constraints of convention. What does that mean to you, and how has it worked for you and your students?
Okay, so when I created the Disruptor's Guide, I did it from a place of wondering and worrying about all my colleagues out there who want to try to dare different and to brave better with grading, but for whatever reason, and too often I believe that reason is they've been told that they can't do things. And it just struck me that in this world of growth mindsets and the things that we tend to pitch in education, we sure have a heck of a lot of can'ts out there. And so when I made the Disruptor's Guide, I tried to anticipate what are those things that people say we can't do. You can't allow kids full points on retakes. You can't allow kids to use resources on a test. You can't allow kids to oh geez, I'm drawing a blank. You can't allow kids to you can't give 50 without kids having done anything. And my response to all those, and there are 7 of them in the Disruptor's Guide, was sure you can. Teachers all over the place are doing these things. Teachers all over the place are taking late work without penalizing kids. Teachers all over the place are having 50% as their floor in their classroom. People all over the place are letting kids use resources on assessments and other things. Sure, we can do these things, and so should you. And so the next time you're in that department meeting or in that PLC meeting and people are talking about the impossibilities, present to them some of the cans instead of always focusing on the can'ts. And Steph, going back to the frustrations with grading, it's the grading gets in the way of learning, but my frustration with the implementation of trying to be innovative is that we just meet all these can'ts, and I'm tired of the can'ts. Let's quit talking about can'ts and let's talk about the cans and follow the different models that are out there.
So like
go ahead, Steph. Go ahead.
Oh no. So like late points and things we grade the way we were graded, right, Antonio?
Right,
Monty?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we're creatures of nature.
Yep.
It's what's familiar to us. We turned out okay. So what was wrong with the way that we were taught?
Yeah.
Right.
So looking at this, you accept late work without penalty. You don't do a 50%, right? Is that what we're understanding here?
Absolutely, but let's be honest, like not always. Remember, I was the guy that came straight out of college, and my first gig, I had 7th graders for social studies, and by damn, I was going to teach them responsibility, and I was taking no late work.
Yeah.
That lasted for about 2 weeks, right? and then it went to 50%, and then it went to like 10% for every day late or every week late. I mean, I feel like most other educators, I ran the full gamut, making stuff up along the way, and as you said, grading as I was graded, because as I got lost, I started thinking back to like, okay, how did my teachers do it? Because as we know, no one taught us how to grade in our college classes, in our prep classes. We took a 3-credit assessment course that was a drive-by at best, right? And then we got into the classroom and we were expected to grade kids' work as if we knew what we were doing. And that's why we typically went back to our default setting of how did my teachers do this? And then we just perpetuate the can'ts and perpetuate the tradition and the convention that's all essentially just been made up anyway. So if it's all been made up, let's make it better.
Monty, okay. and so to that point, how did your colleagues react to your subversion of traditional norms and
well, I mean, basically, I feel like I was living out my former life by sharing this Disruptor's Guide, that I had heard all of these objections in my own experience. And then, you know, as you connect with other people on, the best thing to ever happen to education for educators is social media. And I'll just use Twitter as my example, because that's the platform that I go to. It's just like we start looking around and we realize we're not alone, right? And so I knew firsthand that I was not alone in hearing these very same objections time and time again, every time, you know, because how does it typically start? Like, we got to do something about all these F grades, right? All these freshmen are failing. What are we going to do? And we just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. And then when somebody does present something innovative, like let's do the 50% rule, you know, no, you can't do that, because then you're skewing the results of the grade. It's like, come on, right? Like, let's have an honest conversation about what we can and can't do. And so, you know, I was reliving my own history here, and I believed I was capturing what so many others feel. And it wasn't to point fingers. It was to say, hey, we can do this. Right? There are ways that we can go about this, ways that we can make it happen. And the whole idea of do, reflect, better is give something a try, learn from it, reflect on it, and then make it better, make it yours. That's one of the most important things I've learned, is making things mine. They have to fit me, or they're not going to work in my classroom.
Okay. Can you address, like, so Angie, if you look in the chat here, Angie said they've been doing that in their district, and Linda has the percent points off for 3 days, and after that it becomes 0, and then they're still required to complete the work. Is that, I'm wondering, Linda, you said that, but is that a frustration for you? Yes or no? How, I mean, Monty, how do you address this?
I'm going to assume it's a frustration on Linda's part. So, you know, I think this is just another attempt to try to mitigate missing work, you know, but not mitigated enough that we are willing to let go and just let it be what it's going to be. How I would respond to this, and how I do respond to it in my classroom, is like, there's no penalty ever for any late work. You know, there's work that my kids need to complete, and I'm going to give them the time and the space to complete that. And if they don't, part of that ownership of their own learning is taking responsibility for that. You missed an opportunity, kiddo. You know, you had an opportunity to learn. And I know enough by now, after 27 years, that everything that I teach my kids doesn't matter nearly as much as I think it has in the past. I'm not saying that what we're doing is not important. I'm saying a lot of the stuff that we do, we don't need to die on that hill. And I feel like a lot of times educators want to die on the hill just to keep kids compliant. And I'm not saying that that's what Linda's doing necessarily. I don't have enough context there. But my own experiences, I know educators who are going to die on the hill. They are not going to accept late work. They cannot even conceive of the idea of not penalizing it. And oftentimes it's for some real world reason that they offer up. And we know that we can turn stuff in late in the real world. Half of my colleagues turn in their lesson plans and other things late, and they're late to work. I mean, they're still employed.
Yeah, actually, that's interesting. Kay, my darling, you dropped your chat to the host and panelists, so everyone can't see it in the everyone chat. So if you would kindly copy that and paste it again for everyone to see, because she's saying, yeah, you're still required to complete work and then get a 0 grade. Would you go to work without a day's pay? And then you bringing up the whole, yeah, we turn in lesson plans. What's the, you know, that's amazing.
You know, Steph, for me, done is more important than when, right? Like, I don't care when it's done. I want it done, kiddo. I'm not putting this in front of you to keep you busy. I'm not putting this in front of you to put a score in the grade book. I'm putting it in front of you because I believe there's value in your doing it. If it's practice, it's to prepare for a performance or assessment, whatever you want to call them, you know. And so when it's done doesn't really matter to me as much as it is done.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. I think so. And it looks like Danielle here sort of does a Marzano scale, I think. And we're going to talk, actually, Danielle, that's a good point. That might bring us into our next question. So Monty, again, talking about theoretical, talking about building that classroom culture of trust and vulnerability. So what practical and philosophical advice would you give to educators who maybe aren't ready for the end of the year, but want to start next year strong with the idea of being disruptive with grading? How do they get their colleagues on board? How do they get administrators and parents and students on board? I mean, how do they make that happen?
You know, this is what I think, Steph. I think we have to know our why first, and we need to know that deeply, and we need to be at a place where we are not only willing but able to share that with those who matter, and you know, who are the people who matter here: the parents, the students, the administrators, colleagues. You know, and you know, as you and I have talked in the past, you know, when we know our why, I think we have an opportunity to disarm those who object. And this is how I would go about it. You know, like for instance, let's say that Sally wants next year, her building doesn't do it, but she's heard about the 50% rule. She wants to try that out in her classroom, even though it runs a little counter to what they do in the building, even though it may run a little bit counter to what they're doing in her department. I would encourage her to speak to whomever needs to be spoken to, whether it's her principal, her colleagues, her department chair, and just simply say, hey, I need to do this to be my best self in my classroom. I want an opportunity to learn from it. So please give me that opportunity for this first quarter to try out the 50% rule in my classroom. I will share with you what I am learning. I will talk to you at the end. But I just need you to give me a chance to try to do the things that are going to make me the most effective teacher I can be in my classroom with my kids. Can you grant me that grace?
Oh my God, I'm
And
not
if
crying.
you're,
I'm not crying, you're crying. Oh my God.
if there is a principal
Right?
worth their weight, or a department chair worth their weight in that school, how can they say no to that? But you have to know your why. Why, you know, doing better, you know, the whole project money is not about a whim. I just didn't decide on a whim to give kids an A for the entire year. I didn't just decide on the whim to no longer penalize kids for late work. I mean, these are deep reflections. These are things that I am aware of that are edges in my classroom that I need to address, edges in my own work. And no one is there to give me no one was there to give me the answers. You know, those of us who taught pre-Twitter for years and years and years, we were isolated. There was no like, I'm not alone, you know, and so we had to find our way, and we're still finding our way, even though there is this greater connectivity and collective. But that's how I would go about it. It doesn't matter what it is, Steph, whether it's jumping all the way from the 50% to the, you know, I'm going to give my kids an A for the year. You know, I mean, that's the huge, bold step. And I don't do that anymore, because who's going to follow that, right? But I think that there are practical things that people can do to follow. But as I said earlier, you've got to make it fit you and your style. I don't want anyone to do what Monty Syrie has done. I want people to look at what Monty Syrie has done, reflect on it, make it their own, and make it work. I don't think it's as easy as plug and play, because there's so many factors that come into play. I mean, the culture that I set up in my classroom, the culture that other teachers set up in their classrooms, they have to find and make fit the things that are going to be best for them. And I think sometimes when people hear from those of us who are doing innovative, particularly gradeless work in the classroom, they think it has to be done in a certain way, and it does not. There are so many different ways that people are going about trying to take grading off the table and to put learning in focus. And so, you know, that first tweet that you shared, you know, like, I don't like tweeting about grading. I want to tweet about and talk about learning, but I have to tweet about grading because it keeps getting in the damn way, you know?
Yeah.
And I believe we can change that. But the focus has to be on learning, not grading, because it changes everything. It changes how the kids learn. It changed how I teach. I used to be the guy that thought everything depended on me in the front. Right? Like, I have to set up this, I have to do all of these things. All right. And the kids either, you know, they do or they don't. And if they don't, it's on me, you know, yada, yada, yada. But what I've learned from this is teaching is responding. Everything that I do is to answer the question, how do I create better learning experiences for my kids in my classroom? And the key learning that I've gotten from all this is to try to get to a place where we are engaged in the feedback response process.
Yeah.
That is where I become a teacher. I tell my kids, I have not taught you anything, right? I haven't taught you until I've responded to the work that you have done, and I have helped you do better.
Thank you. Well, so this is called, I mean, we have the, like, okay, first of all, I stop it. I don't even know, like, you're preaching to the choir and it's fabulous. But I want to address this NGN. You call this, it started out as like no grade November, like let's try baby steps. And then now you want to turn it into no grade never. And then these, like, could you briefly address, these are like the 3 baby steps you recommend teachers take to start with going gradeless, or doing better.
I felt like I had to kind of walk the walk here a little bit. I can't just rally and say, everybody go no grade November, right? And so what I tried to provide, Steph, were some practical steps, all the way from just getting my tippy toes in the water to taking a deep dive. And so these are the ones that the folks are seeing right now are the first 3 pretty simple steps, not that I made up, but that I've kind of made my own a little bit. Most of us have an online grade book. We use Skyward out here in Washington. I don't know what other platforms are being used, but I have to imagine that the other platforms, much like Skyward, have a no count option in the grade book where you can make an assignment where it doesn't count, right? Like it's recorded, but it doesn't factor into the kids' grades. Even if we do something as simple as that, where kids begin to understand that it's not just about putting a grade at the end, that there's value in doing the work. And so it doesn't hurt or help, but they still get to see the value and the sake of doing it. We can just simply set our grade book to no count. That way parents know we're doing it. I know a lot of districts unfortunately require you have to do so many assignments per week. Do no count assignments. It's not going to hurt the grade. It's still there. You're still reporting and reporting what your kids are doing. Parents can see it. You're keeping record. It's a pretty easy way to step in, I believe. And then report only, right? I mean, this is a little different. You could just report only. And I came up with a really simple system for parents, because again, I think grades should be communication. That's their whole role, I believe, right? It should be communication to the kids. It should be communication to the parents. All right. After that, I believe it becomes something else for someone else. And so that being said, one thing that I use pretty effectively with parents and with kids is like a 2 is complete, a 1 is incomplete, a 0 is missing. And you could even combine that with a no count if you wanted to, and do it that way. And then finally, and this one gets a lot of pushback sometimes, because and the pushback is you can't give kids practice without points. I think it was even in the Disruptor's Guide, if I remember correctly. Yes, you can. I went for an entire year, 180 days, and kids kicked butt for 180 days and did work with no points because they knew they were going to get an A at the end of the year, no matter what. So why not do the work? So if you're going to do practice, please try the pointless system. All right. And what that's going to do for teachers is it's going to make them really mindful about what they're putting in front of their kids. Is this really serving any purpose or value? If it's not, why am I going to put it in front of them anyway? You're not going to magically transform your classroom with any 3 of these things, but you're going to begin, I believe, taking steps down the road to put learning more in the forefront of the work in your classroom. I think these are 3 easy ways that you can start that. And there are other ways out there too. Ken O'Connor has his 15 fixes for broken grades. I mean, there's so many resources out there that folks can have access, or have access to.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, this is a lot, but again, we're recording this and you're all going to be able to have all of these links too. But so we're going to get to, I know some of you have some great questions in the chat. We're going to get to that after our next question, because we do want to talk about how video learning, Edpuzzle, can help with the idea of feedback.
Yeah. Obviously at Edpuzzle, we are a video learning company. With without belaboring that point too much, Monty, how can video be a useful tool for being disruptive with grading?
Okay, I didn't really know until I discovered, and that was during the pandemic, right? Because a lot of us found ourselves in remote situations from our kids, and so I quickly learned how to use Screencastify to make videos for my kids, not only to give instruction, but certainly to give feedback. And I think that there are other, obviously, Edpuzzle, there are other platforms out there that folks can use.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm
but-
gonna edit, I'll edit that part out in the.
Okay, all right.
We do have a
so-
screen, yeah, I get it. I used Screencastify too, give them major props.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know how many of our audience knows that, yeah, we now have a built-in screen recorder within Edpuzzle. But why would you use that script? So did you record yourself? Did you record your students? What?
I just recorded myself because we were in a distant situation, and I found that kids were already anxious and felt isolated and excluded and disconnected, and I found putting a face in front of them, even though it was a video recording, seemed to make a whole heck of a lot of difference. And being the forward thinker that I am, I thought, like, why am I not doing this now that we're back, or when we get back? Why wouldn't I do this? Because if I don't have the opportunity to meet with my kids in person in terms of conferencing, the next best thing, and maybe even better thing, if we're thinking about it, because when it's face to face and it's not recorded, you can't go back and review it. And I think one of the very cool things about video is that the kids can go back and review it. They can watch it again and again, and I think what's great about video too is we get to see faces, we get to hear tone, we get to see gestures. I think that makes such a huge difference for kids. And I found it really effective, particularly in the spring when I have so many kids who miss class that day because of sports in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Like they have to go play their baseball game, and then they show up the next day. It's like, what did I miss? And it's like, oh man, why didn't I have that recorded? And so if I have that recorded and in Google Classroom, kids can just click on that and they can see that. And I think video is already a big thing. I think it's going to continue to grow and become a really vital part of what we do in the classroom, whether we're remote or in person.
Have you ever used video to give feedback on student work?
Oh yes, all the time. Yeah. And so I was so thankful to have that opportunity, because again, the kids felt disconnected, isolated. They didn't really know me, but they could see my face. They could hear my tone, and so much tone gets mistaken when we're writing stuff. And I'm always anxious about writing feedback, but I'm less anxious when it comes to video feedback. So.
This will show you how old I am. When I was a high school English teacher, I would give my students feedback in the form of audio feedback on a tape recorder.
Wow.
But I wish I could see now, putting their paper on screen, and instead of taking all the papers home, putting all the red marks, I would be that person, now I would probably record it and walk them through the process instead of putting all the marks in the margins.
Yep.
So that could be right. Antonio, did you?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I really like your point about tone, and, I'm sure nobody that is with us tonight has ever misinterpreted a text message or a line of email that they've ever read. Right. But there's so much less room for that when you can see facial expressions and tone and all of those things. I mean, we have the technology. We can do this thing in a much more efficient and effective way.
Yeah. And I again, that fits in with your whole idea of creating this collaborative environment for students where you're learning and they're learning. And, it's instead of just, here's your paper, here's the comments, and you fix it and figure it out. Carolina, thank you. Yeah. Our screen recording option in Edpuzzle is available, but you want to install the Chrome extension first and foremost. Okay, Monty, we got some questions coming in that would love you to answer. So let's get to who it was all the way back here. Hold on, I'm scrolling back. Grace McKay asks, how do you handle the idea of a grade being used by college admissions to compare students? If a student has chosen not to learn, but you still give them an A, how does that impact the other students in the class?
Okay, fair enough. So this is a hard one to answer, I think, Steph. And so when we focus on learning, other kids don't matter.
Oh,
Hmm.
okay. Say
When
that
we
one more
focus on
time.
learning, other
Say that
kids
for the
don't
people
matter.
in the, say it again for the people in the back. Yes.
Yeah. So when we focus on learning, grades don't matter. When we focus on grading, we have all of these institutions that suddenly care about grading, college being one of them. And one of the things that I learned is that when you have a classroom where kids are focused on learning, the competition, if you will, and I first started, this was in honors classes, so I had my grade rubbers to the nth degree, right?
Yeah.
And some of their initial responses to it were like, well, wait a minute, what if I do this work and John doesn't do this work, but he's still going to get the same grade? And I was like, yeah, but he's not going to get the same learning, kiddo.
No.
Right? Because he chose not to do it. You're going to get something out of this. And so I feel like the kids' responses to the competitive nature of grading is on us. We created that monster and we
Mm.
continue to sustain that monster, I believe. As far as college admissions go, um, they got to figure their own house out as far as I'm concerned, and I know that that's kind of pawning it
Yeah.
off. It's like, if you're gonna have
Yeah.
high expectations, then you need to raise your level of support. Quit thinking that we're going to take care of any and everything for you and hand you kids who are perfect and ready to go. They're continuing to learn even when they get into college, folks. Take some and I'm sorry if there are college folks in the chat right now, but take some responsibility for that and help those kids out. I mean, apparently you still want them anyway because you take them in English 99 and charge them, all right, but don't give them any credit for English 99. So, figure it out, folks. We cannot any longer bow to college and the college admissions in terms of how we're best going to serve kids in our classrooms right now, because that is a ranking, sorting, labeling thing. And I'm not about that biz. I'm about supporting kids in their learning. So quite frankly, I don't care. And I know that's kind of a harsh way to say it, but college has got to figure it out on their own.
Yeah, I agree. I had 2 kids in college and I'm feeling that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got another question that you want to address, Antonio.
Yeah, Addie Sausner, I apologize thoroughly and profusely if I butchered your name, Addie. But she asks, how much time do you think is reasonable to accept late work, Monty?
You're asking the wrong guy, because I think for me, any time is reasonable. One of the things I discovered is for too long, I thought it was about my convenience, right? And I've discovered that teaching is inconvenient, that working with humans is inconvenient. And so I've gotten over that, and I expect and I accept that. That being said, not everybody has to be me. I mean, I'm the guy that, like, if it's a quarter later and they all of a sudden got, inspired and they wanted to do the work and get it turned in, one of the things we know we can always do is change grades. So I am willing to be inconvenienced to help a kid out if that's what they need. That being said, I completely understand how hard our jobs are at times. I completely understand what it feels like when late work is coming in. And I understand how it feels like sometimes we're being taken advantage of. And so reasonable, I think, has to fit you. And I think as long as you're talking to your kids about it and giving them a reasonable and fair take on things, most kids respond pretty well to that. What they don't respond well to is the hard line, gotcha, no exceptions. So I wish I had a better answer to that. Again, as I started, you're asking the wrong guy, because I'm flexible to a fault. I'll take anything, anytime.
Okay. So, first of all, Monty, Frank needs your personal contact info. He wants you to come do a keynote at his district. So,
Okay.
Frank
Sign me up, please.
Frank, if you're on Twitter, send him a DM or Monty, right? Best way to get in touch with you because he wants you to
Yep.
come. Okay. Yes, I think so. Yeah. So, what about Antonio? Yeah, you've got a question that you wanted to ask too from here. So go ahead and ask that. I'm gonna comb through the rest of the questions too.
Okay. Yeah, Monty, I noticed a handful of folks in the chat kind of, throughout the presentation so far, kind of mentioning how important administrative buy-in for, these types of approaches toward grading have been for them. I'm curious what your experience was in terms of your administration's perspective and responses when you first started applying these techniques in your classroom.
I think my situation was probably a rare exception. I did let my principal know what I was the whole admin team know what I was going to do the spring before, and they were on board with it. And I don't know how I got so lucky with that. I'd like to think that I painted a pretty fair picture of what I think I knew my why, right? I started with, I want to learn about learning. And I think that I had been around long enough and they trusted me enough to give me a shot. And I expected more pushback. I expected more pushback from my colleagues. Like how can you allow Monty to give kids an A for the entire year? What is that going to do? What is that going to do?
Probably waiting for you to crash and burn, and then they're like,
yeah,
oh,
what is that going to do for the rest of us? And at that point, I was still feeling like I wanted to be pretty jiggy with the whole thing. And I was hoping for more pushback because then what I was going to ask for at that point was an audit of everyone's grading practices. And really get to the table and have an honest discussion. I expected it to blow up. I expected people to be pissed and there was going to be a big brouhaha over it, and there never was. And that surprised me a little bit, but it also taught me, because I've put down the sword, I picked up the walking stick, and I'm just a learner now. I'm not going to fight the fight against things that I can't win, but again, I would go back, Antonio, for those who are entertaining doing such ideas, whether it's as simple as the 50% rule or as crazy as the give them an A for the year. Know your why, communicate, have a conversation, and make it about learning. I think it's been a while since I've looked at No Grade November, but I think I even fashioned a template for teachers to use to write to their administrators. I think it's still there, as kind of a model for you to use. And so if you want to use that, I think it's still there and you can use that. Again, I just think, folks, it's just time for us to just be honest about, what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I think I've discovered rather that if we focus on learning, people seem to respond well to that. We're learners first, right? And we just happen to be the ones who are standing at the front of the room sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes. And, I think there's so much there that we can do, but we just have to, be honest with people. I just feel like we just haven't had enough honest conversations in education.
Antonio, you sent that to us. Can you drop that to everyone? He's got the letter template. Okay, we have time for one last question.
Okay.
This is from Radine. And I hope I said that correctly. What do you do for a student who is completely unmotivated to learn whatever topic you may be teaching? I have students who simply check out of my science class because they just don't feel like they like it.
Love them more.
Love them more.
I know that's, I love them more. Is it Radine? Radine, every teacher in this chat right now has at least one of those kids in their room every single period of the day. And I think, whether it is because of COVID and the pandemic, I think it's been exacerbated. And we have those kids. And for me, with that, they're telling us something, right? Like behavior is communication. And I don't think we're willing to. I'm not saying you, Radine, but I don't think enough of us are willing to listen to what that really means. And I think playing school harder is not the answer right now. I have a kiddo right now. He'll do some things, he won't do other things, and I meet him where he is, and that's what we do. you know, and I wish I had the golden ticket answer to that question, because I think it's on everybody's mind, and I think it's going to continue to be on our minds. But I don't think it's as simple as just kind of trying to pawn it off on COVID. I think it had begun long before COVID and the pandemic. I just think that COVID just kind of brought it to the forefront, and we got to do something there. On another day, I'd like to talk about, like, do we really need 4 years of high school anymore? And I think that's a topic for another day, perhaps, because I feel like we're just holding some kids hostage right now.
I would even like to see a 4-day school, and like kids could work, get that real life balance of work, and because actually, and I know I said we had time for one more question, but I'm going to answer this based on what I've learned. So tell me if I'm doing this right, Monty. Okay. So Lakeisha asked, do we encourage students to have real world deadlines? Well, I think that goes back to your question about college. In college, or, we're doing what we can in school. All right. We're getting them ready. But let's be honest, school isn't the real world, right? I mean, it's not really. Okay. And when they get out in the real world, like I got a kid who just graduated college in December, he's out in the real world. So he's getting his education in that institution, right? As in terms of real world deadlines and things like that. But I think, like, based on what you were saying, college is college, high school is high school, real world is real world, correct? Did I do that okay? Would you like to?
Of course you did that okay. You did it your way, Steph. Remember, there's no way, there's just our way, right? And so when I think about that, I think about how hard it's been to teach my own children responsibility. And I have far more leverage with them than I do with any of my students. And I think about the struggle that's been, and so I've kind of gotten to the point where it's not wrong or bad for us to work on teaching kids. I hate saying teaching kids responsibility, about giving kids experiences with responsibility. I believe we continue to learn responsibility the entirety of our lives. I'm still learning responsibility. And to think that we're going to magically make kids responsible, in the 4 years or whatever, how many years we have them, and they're going to enter the world, boom, I mean, think of all the irresponsible adults we have in the real world. Apparently it didn't work, so let's try something else. I mean, I know that I'm not trying to be flip, but responsibility is something that we can experience with kids. Teaching kids experience or responsibility, excuse me, I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I think you can't teach, they earn it, right? That's kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I obviously chat, there's a lot of happy people who are here, and we are so glad you're here, but we can't be here forever. And I know a lot of you have to go take care of kids and go eat dinner and things like that, depending on your coast. So Monty, this has been a treat for me, because I've been fangirling you so hard on Twitter. So I want to thank you. I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. Hang in there, because we've got links for you for all of the goodies. Don't go anywhere yet. I don't want you to miss anything. What's next for you, Monty? What do you want to promote?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I just want folks to dare different and brave better, and I want to help them do that. I think I can help them do that. And I'd love the opportunity. So if you want me to come to your building, your department, your district, in person, via Zoom, love to have a conversation with you.